You're listening to the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast, Episode 30, broadcasted mid-October 2020. Today, we assemble a distinguished roundtable of Target book collection experts to impart their knowledge. An outrageous offer that is no carnival, but more monster. And we protect your Target books the right way. All set! Hello, Mr. Fraser Hines?
Hello, Fraser Hines here.
You're on.
They all say, who is Doctor Who? Where is he from? What does he do? They wonder who is Doctor Who? So I ask you, who's Doctor Who?
Welcome back to the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast, the podcast that explores the world of Doctor Who collecting, Doctor Who Collectors, protection of your collectibles, and Doctor Who merchandise of all varieties. Happy to present our 30th episode. I am Larry Van Mersbergen, your host, and I have been collecting Doctor Who since 1981. I opened the first store dedicated to Doctor Who in Chicago in 1984, and it's called Bundles from Britain. And we are mentioned in a great book that documented the history of Doctor Who in America called Red, White, and Who, The Story of Doctor Who in America. This book is very important for everyone to find out what happened here in America from ATV Publishing, and you can find our mention on page 384. And for your convenience, we have a link to buy that book directly on our homepage at drwhocollectors.com. We were able to reach Fraser on the phone, not really, but anyway, our theme song is Who's Doctor Who, composed by Barry Mason and Les Reed, performed by the great Fraser Hines. By the way, he played Jamie McCrimmon in over 117 Doctor Who episodes, the longest-running character. We thank you for your support of this podcast, and you can continue to support us on platforms such as Podbean at drwhocollectors.podbean.com. You can also shop for your favorite Doctor Who items on our eBay store, and you can find it at bit.ly/DWC podcast. You can hear this podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, including the Podbean platform. We are very proud to be a member of the Doctor Who Podcast Alliance, and you can see and hear other great Doctor Who podcasts by visiting drwhopodcastalliance.org. If you are a Doctor Who podcaster, I would visit that website and add your podcast to the list of these wonderful podcasts. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All of our gallery photos will now be streamed through Instagram and can be viewed on our webpage at drwhocollectors.com. I want to first recommend two other great podcasts. First, we have the Police Box in the Junkyard podcast, where a random Doctor Who story or book will be discussed, and I was happy to be on the first episode where we talked about the Sunmakers. It's hosted by our good friend Eric Gulbranson. Secondly, you need to get in touch with the Target Book Club podcast. They're getting into the Tom Baker era. Genesis of the Daleks is the latest episode as of this taping. And they do a thorough discussion of the Target books in story order, which is interesting to me since they were not written or published in story order. On today's program, we have Collection Protection, our featured story, and our featured collectible, and the outrageous offer. First, I want to follow up, though, on our previous episode, the item that you might not be able to get, the Web of Fear Target hardcover prototype. I did get an email from that anonymous eBay seller that was referred to me by Mr. David J. Howe, who actually thanked me for not naming him. I don't name people if I don't have their permission. But he pulled the auction after second thoughts, but he was going to actually try to help us out by finding the letter that came with the prototype so we can get a definitive date on that collectible. And I will update you with that information when I get it. So we have Collection Protection and our main story after the break.
Hello, fellow time travelers. I'm Tony Whitt with the Doctor Who Target Book Club podcast, the podcast in which we undertake the insert adjective here task of discussing in story order all of the Doctor Who novelizations. I'm joined by
Dalton Hughes
and by
Alison Fitzafrey.
and we record our episodes twice a month. You're listening to the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast. Enjoy your travels.
I would like to invite you to take a trip across all of time and space.
Join us in the police box as we discuss the worlds of Doctor Who in a completely random order.
We discuss it all: TV stories, audio adventures, novels, nonfiction books, and on and on. I'm your host, Eric Branson. I would be very happy if you joined me for the Police Box in the Junkyard podcast.
The Police Box in the Junkyard podcast is a proud partner of the Video Junkyard podcast and can be found on most major podcast platforms including SoundCloud, Podcast Addict, Stitcher Radio, Google Play, and Spotify.
You are listening to
The Doctor Who Collectors Podcast.
Sad, really, isn't it? People spend all their time making nice things and other people come along and break them.
And now it's time for collection protection. Since we're talking about Target book collecting today, I want to make sure we protect those Target books as best we can. So the best collection protection supplies come from Bags Unlimited Incorporated. You can find them at bagsunlimited.com or 800-767-2247. For the Target books, we recommend the regular paperback sleeve, which is 4 7/8 by 8 inches, 2.5 mil polyethylene with a 1 1/2 inch flap. This is for long-term archival protection of your Target book paperbacks. They fit without being too snug. They'll keep them from yellowing with age and keep those spines nice and crisp. So collection protection. Bags Unlimited Incorporated.
Up there is the scanner, those are the doors, that is a chair with a panda on it. Sheer poetry, dear boy.
And now it's time on the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast for our main story. And today we're doing another Collectors Roundtable, and we have 8 distinguished collectors of Target books, as that will be our topic today. However, under Gallifreyan law, it is required that whenever I discuss Target books, I have to bring in our resident expert, the host and producer of the Target Book Club podcast, Mr. Tony Whitt. Good morning, sir.
Good morning to you. Yes, if you didn't, I'd have to send the Sisterhood of Karn after you.
Absolutely, and I don't want to go back to that planet if I can avoid it. That's, but yeah, Mr. Tony Whitt has been with us when we discussed the first 2 seasons of Ellen Wingate hardbacks, and has been a great supporter of our podcast, and we as well are big supporters of that podcast. If you're not listening to the Doctor Who Target Book Club podcast, you should be, and in fact, we expect you to. So, good morning to you, and then we'll start with our friends from the UK. David, why don't we start with you?
Hi, my name is David Russell. I live in Northampton in England, but as you can tell from the accent, I'm Scottish. I have been a Doctor Who fan since 1978. I can remember back to watching The Stones of Blood and being absolutely terrified when the Ogre killed the people in the tent. That's my earliest memory.
Oh, that's fantastic. Oh, I'm sorry. And Tony, I forgot to ask, when did you start watching Doctor Who? I think everybody knows, but go ahead and...
Well, I claim it's 1979. I've been told that date might be wrong.
Oh,
it might be earlier. But it was the second episode of Ark in Space initially. And then the last 20 minutes of Terror of the Zygons, because here in the US you could watch it every night at 6 o'clock, or you could watch the omnibus editions on Sunday, and they showed those out of order. So I don't think it was until Genesis of the Daleks, which we're going to be discussing next on the program, that I actually watched it regularly. And hell of a story to watch in its entirety for the first time.
Oh, yes, yes. Okay, well, thank you so much for that. And we'll go to Nigel.
Hi, Larry.
Hello, Nigel.
Hi. So my name's Nigel Adams. I'm on the southeast coast of England, a little seaside town called Broadstairs. I have been a Doctor Who fan since, I'm pretty certain it was part 2 of Terror of the Zygons. The barn scene, I seem to remember. It's quite possible that the memory cheats, but basically I've got a very, very clear memory of flicking through the channels and finding part 2 of Terror of the Zygons and being hooked from that point onwards. And that would have been just before my 5th birthday.
Oh, fantastic. A man after my own heart. I started very young as well. Oh, thank you. We'll go to Mr. Lee Thompson. We'll start with the father and then go to the son. So good morning, sir.
Good morning. I actually wasn't planning on this. I was actually going to stay in the background with my son, and then he said, "Hey, jump on!" Like, I'd have to say back, probably 1975. I think the Mutants, WTTW Channel 11 in Chicago was there we go. They were the only ones that had Doctor Who, and I lived in northern Indiana, and we had a TV antenna. And that's about the only channel that we could get out of Chicago, but it was great. You have to stay up super late at night to watch it. But I just remember as a kid loving it.
Oh yes. I'll address that when it comes back around to me. But thank you. That's great. Okay, and we'll go to Mr. William Thompson next here.
Yes. Hello. I am definitely the odd one out here. I've started Doctor Who with the revival in 2005 and fell in love with the new show and decided that, hey, there's a lot of history to this. So I started going back and rewatching all the old episodes and went, hey, I think I like these a little bit better. So I've kind of been a huge fan of the quote-unquote classic Doctors, and which kind of led into the whole collecting thing.
Oh, fantastic. Next we have Randy, who's here.
Hi there. I'm Randy Holndoner. I'm from Chicago area. I actually work with Lee, so we have a little trifecta going with Will, Lee, and myself. We'll probably get into that a little later with how we started collecting our books.
Okay.
But I probably, again, just like with Lee, WTTW in Chicago, sometimes it was 10:30 at night, sometimes it was 11 at night. It was either, I think it came on after Monty Python, if I recall.
That is right.
So it was a good 2-hour, half-hour mix there. So, but I want to say it was probably around 1980-ish when I started getting involved. And honestly, I've been trying to rack my brain as to which episode. I honestly don't recall, but Tom Baker's been my doctor forever, so it was that era.
Okay.
How recent those episodes were when they came over to Chicago, I don't know, but it was around 1980 when I got into it.
Fantastic. Okay, and next we'll do Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris DeLuca. I've been a Doctor Who fan since the mid-'80s. Started watching it on WNYC TV 31 PBS channel from the city. I lived in Queens at the time. It was actually the only PBS channel that came in clear that showed Doctor Who, even though there was a few in the area. That channel's way gone. But I got hooked in the middle of some Tom Baker, Sarah Jane Smith episode, which I'm still not sure which it is. I think somewhere around Mask of Mandragora or somewhere around there. And been hooked ever since.
Fantastic. And finally, Eluides.
Hey, guys. I'm also from the Chicagoland area, Northwest Indiana, so definitely caught up with it on PBS during the weekdays with my dad when he'd get home from work. And then on Sunday nights, as I got a little older, I would sneak staying up and putting blankets under my door so my mother couldn't see the light coming through it as I would try to watch those omnibus episodes. I think first episode would have been Terror of the Autons story that I had watched on a Sunday night. That's kind of clear in my head. And I know it was around 1975 when I first started, 75, 76 when I first started watching. So I was about 3.5, 4 years old at the time.
Wonderful. Okay, and as for me, I tell this story on the podcast all the time, but I started watching in Chicago in 1975, and I remember the first episode was The Mind of Evil in full color. Because I have this clear memory. I made a Keller machine out of Legos, so I remember it that well. And of course, my mother introduced me to the series. She was watching it and said, "Hey, you love this. Come on, see it." Well, she turned me into a monster. What can I say? So that's wonderful. Well, okay. Well, thank you all for being here. And we're going to get into some discussion questions here about collecting Target books. And just, I know I'm a former Chicago dealer. I had a store in 1985, and we did stock Target books. And that was the first year that we could get them readily from a New York distributor named Lyle Stewart. But prior to that, it was very difficult to get them here in the United States. So what I'd like to ask is, what was the first Target book you bought, where you bought it, how much did it cost, and what prompted you to choose that particular book? So I'll start across the pond here with Nigel.
Well, I wonder if the answers from the Brits will differ from the Americans.
It will. That's why I wanted to start there.
Yeah, but I wonder if David will have the same experience as me, which is basically I was bought my first Target book by my mother for Christmas 1976. And probably it was another good 5 years or so before I actually had any pocket money, an allowance to spend. So for the first 5 years, I had them bought for me. And the first one I had bought for me was Revenge of the Cybermen. And it was very exciting. I again remember it very clearly because I didn't even know there were Doctor Who books in those days. And for the next kind of 3 or 4 years, I was bought a book on a regular basis, had it read to me at bedtime. I seem to remember second one was Pyramids of Mars. Three Doctors was the third one I had. It all gets a bit vague after that. But yeah, I got lots of very happy memories of not only kind of watching and loving the series, but yeah, having the books read to me. And my mum became a big Doctor Who fan as well while she was doing that. And there was a picture I sent Larry last week. Yes. I was pleased to be able to take her to the exhibition of Target artwork that was on at the Comic Strip Museum in London a couple of years ago. And Pyramids of Mars, Mum has always said is her favourite story. And so I was able to show her the artwork, which had been loaned by the current owner at the exhibition. So yeah, it was a good few years before I bought my first. I couldn't tell you what that was because that's lost in the mist of time. But the very first one I owned was Revenge of the Cybermen.
Do you know how much approximately it costs to get?
I think 40p. 40p British pence, yeah.
And back in that time, that's probably close to a dollar in the United States. I'm trying to do the math, but that's going to be important because when we come back to the United States, the price greatly changes. David, what about you?
So yeah, similar to Nigel, I do remember that my first book was the Loch Ness Monster, probably because I'm Scottish, so I think that's what kind of drew me to it. But also I think because I was that age, the cover's like a Looney Tunes cartoon cover, so I think there was something that was kind of drew me to that as well. But I remember it was in a small bookshop on a small island in Scotland, and my parents had dragged me away to their holiday home, which didn't have a television, and I was bored as young as a 6 or 7-year-old would have been, and we were taken to this bookshop and they were on the shelf, and I demanded that I was bought one because there wasn't even a TV.
Wow.
So I needed something to do.
Okay. Absolutely.
So yeah, and that was, that's exactly, Nigel is right, 40 pence, so 40 about
pence.
$1. Yeah.
That would be the price on the book, absolutely. We'll start with Tony Whitt. You sir.
Yes. Well, the very first Target book I got was not bought for me, and I didn't buy it because in the United States, Doctor Who tended to run on PBS stations. Mm-hmm. And they did what were called pledge drives. They still do. In which they asked for money, basically the 1970s version of Patreon, and you got a book if you contributed so much per month, and my parents did that for me, and I ended up getting a twofer. I ended up getting The Horns of Nimon, not exactly the best book to start your collection with, but there you go, and also there were these odd collections that Terrence Dicks did that were Doctor Who and K9 and Other Mechanical Monsters.
Yes.
That was the other one. I still have that. It has fallen apart. I don't dare open it because the binding is so awful. But all of the rest of them seem to hold together pretty well. The very first book I bought for myself, though, was at a comic shop in Michigan, and just happened to see it and begged my parents for it, and it was The Mutants. And this is the weirdest thing. I did not know that there were multiple Doctors until I got that book, because the only stories I had ever seen were the Tom Baker stories, and I'd only seen stories that none of the stories reference multiple doctors. So that was the first time I ever knew that there had been doctors before Tom Baker. As for how much I paid for that, I think it was $250.
Okay.
It was $250 because I remember that distinctly. I wanted 2 books because they had others, and my parents said, "No, you can't have $5. You can have $250." So that's how much it was.
Okay, that's great. Mr. Lee Thompson.
I'm kind of the anomaly in this group.
Okay.
I've been a Doctor Who fan since I was 11. Okay. But I really didn't get interested in the books. I didn't even really know they were around until Mr. Holndoner got me involved. And I'm going to let my son explain that one.
Okay, go ahead, William.
Well, my first Target book was actually the Gunfighters.
Wow.
Because Mr. Randy actually knew that the first Doctor is still one of my favorite Doctors. There we go. And he offered to give it to me for free because he had a duplicate. And I was like, cool. I had no idea what a Target book was. And my dad brought it home, and he and I are looking at it, and we're going, holy cow, this looks really cool. And we're going through the pages, and we're going, oh my goodness, this sounds like what we've seen before with the script portions of it. Like, okay, we got to do some more research. And we were doing more research on how close they are to the scripts, if not the scripts. And it's like, okay, I guess we're invested now. So we went through, and that was the beginning of this year. And now we've kind of gotten most, if not all, of the original line of Target books. So it kind of exploded from there.
Okay, well, fantastic. I'll let Randy chime in here since we've tied the whole 3 together here.
Yeah, since I'm the one to blame apparently, but you're welcome. So I wouldn't necessarily say that COVID was a good thing, but I figured we were at home. What else can I be doing? I want to start reading. I've been looking at watching the old episodes back from the beginning again, and I found a group of Tom Baker books on eBay. Go figure. And maybe I paid about $16 with shipping for the 4.
Okay, that's not bad.
But like, and I work with Lee, so the whole thing with the Gunfighters was the terror and the blossom of their collection. But they but like them, I read them, and I've gone through I think probably 24 since March when we started collecting them.
Okay.
And I think I'm only I think they're one ahead of me. I think I'm missing Evil of the Daleks, and I think that we're both good through the first 156 or however many there are. But
wow.
They're great. The artwork too is just, it's great.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, some great artwork from the originals. Chris Achilleos, of course, and then Alistair Pearson later on, and other artists have contributed. Chris DeLuca.
I don't know when or which book was my first one, because after all these years, it's hard to narrow down just like the first episode I've seen. But back when I started collecting, the only 2 things that you could easily get was the Target books and Doctor Who magazine. For some reason, a lot of comic stores had the novels. So being a collector before that of comics, cards, etc., I was able to get some of those. Also, back then, you could get those in bookstores easily, too, which is, again, one of the easiest things to get of Doctor Who. But at the beginning, since I only knew Tom Baker, I would only get the Tom Baker books. And since there were just a lot of Tom Baker episodes, I was actually reading Tom Baker stories that I hadn't seen yet. So it was actually kind of weird. I didn't know where to place them because, there was no easily gained episode guide back then. Right. So it's like I was reading ones with this woman Romana who I hadn't seen yet, and I was reading books from before the time I started watching and after, and then I expanded out to other doctors eventually. But it was really the only time in my life that I was reading stories that I had never seen before, and I can't replicate that now. I've seen every episode.
Okay, and do you remember how much you paid for that first book?
They weren't much. I think they were only like $1 or something, maybe less than $2. They weren't expensive back then. And then the ones you were getting in the bookstores, whatever that conversion rate that's on the back of every book.
Okay. All right. And Eluides.
For me, it was, I definitely know it was 1983 because of Five Doctors. My buddy Kevin, who was big into Doctor Who at the time, and his parents took us to Walden bookstores in Griffith, Indiana. I remember that very clearly because they were doing a big promotional thing for Doctor Who for the 20th anniversary. Walked in and they had an 18-foot long scarf hanging up and going a raffle to win that. And of course, I was so excited that I wanted to win this. I was certain I was going to, and it took about another 30 years before I got one. But I do remember the first book I ever bought then was right there. It caught my eye instantly, of course, because it's nice and shiny, was The Five Doctors. I absolutely had to buy that. And this is the original copy that I bought. I have like 2 more copies, but this is the one that I tore through so many times since then. And then, of course, at the same time, while not a novel, I had to get this that to me was, outside of the Doctor Who Celebration by Peter Haining, my Bible for Doctor Who at that time as a little kid. And I mean, I tore through it. It's written in. Every time I got a VHS tape for a story, I marked it off. Or if I had a nice clean copy off of PBS still, I marked that off so I could make sure I got everything possible I could of the stories. So yeah, this has definitely had a lot of, I've had a lot of strong affection for. And cover price. So according to these, they were $2.95 a piece. So.
Well, I for myself, it was 1981. That was the first time I had ever discovered anything Doctor Who. My mother was going grocery shopping and said, "Hey, there's a new comics book store that opened up around the corner. Why don't you go there while I do this?" And of course, it was a small shop. It was called the Comic Connection in Morton Grove, Illinois, I remember. And they had mostly comic books, but then on the side wall was a 3-shelf unit that was dedicated to just Doctor Who. They had Doctor Who magazine, they had some Target books, and I thought, wow, this is great. So I bought a copy of The Day of the Daleks. It was the 5th printing, and it was $4.81 with tax. So I remember it was a little more expensive than that. And of course, this one does not have a U.S. price on the back. That's a few years before the U.S. distribution was set up, and the price was dropped because they had to get these directly from W.H. Allen in London. And the cost of shipping and import tax and duty and all that stuff kind of raised the wholesale price of the book to almost 3 times the UK retail price. So it became really tough to find at that early stage. By 1983, as Eluides said, though, the Lyle Stewart Company in New York started a deal with W.H. Allen to import the Doctor Who books and started printing on the back of the book the U.S. price and distributed by Lyle Stewart and all that. But like right now, the original edition here had a UK price, an Australian price, a Canadian price, New Zealand, and Malta. That was, I guess, the only places you could get the Target books. This one is special to me because it was my first favorite Dalek story that I saw on television, and it has a glaring typographical error on page 140, which the hardcore collectors will know. They misspelled the word doctor. It's spelled D-O-T-C-O-R, and it took the printing after this, it took the 6th printing before they finally corrected it. So if you have the original first printing, second printing, third printing, they're all misprinted until the next printing. So that was my my first book. And this is the actual copy I bought. I was always careful to read it so I didn't break the spine. The spine has a little bit of a curve in it, but not too bad. Okay, so you bought your first Target book and you thought, well, this is really cool. So at what point did you decide that this is an area I want to start collecting? So I'll go the opposite here with, I'll start with Randy on this one.
Okay, so the first book I didn't mention was the Ark in Space. So that was the first one that I read, and the reason why I read that was because, like I said, I was going through all the old episodes. This episode was coming up next. I don't remember the last time I saw it. I'm going to read it because I don't want to picture the TV episode. So after I read that, I'm like, wow, these TV show wasn't like this. The books had, I mean, books are always better than the majority of the time, better than the TV shows, but but I was sucked in. I'm not a fast reader, and even though these books are not long, I flew through that, and I'm like, uh-oh. And I looked and saw, and I didn't tell willingly how many there were at the time, but after reading that first one, I'm like, oh, I wonder how many there are, and I'm like, uh-oh. And I'm in, and just like Will said, I'm invested. Here we go. So thank you, COVID, not COVID, but I was hooked right from the start.
Oh, fantastic. Let's see. I'll go ahead and go to William Thompson. When did you when did you begin to collect them?
Well, we really started to collect them once we got probably our 5th or 6th book, because we were at that point we were just going on eBay buying ones from series that we liked. For example, we really liked the very first season of Tom Baker's episodes, so we're like, okay, well, let's try to go get all of those. And then as we were doing that, we're kind of going, okay, this is kind of cool. And then Randy started showing us a couple more big lots, and we're going, hey, if we partner up, we might be able to get these for a really great price. And now it's kind of become our ritual every Saturday. My dad and I, we spend the first 2 hours of the day going through, okay, so this week we've got comic books coming in, we've got Target books coming in, let's figure out what else we need, let's just buy more. And it's become this really fun activity that kind of keeps us going.
Well, that's
so
great.
Now it's more of a bonding thing, which is not what we anticipated, but very well appreciated.
Okay. Lee Thompson, is that exactly what William said here?
Oh no, he's lying through his teeth. It's been great. I sometimes want to strangle Randy because it would have been nice to know what I was getting into. Every time we start something, or we buy a collection with Randy, and there's this other book that just gets thrown in there, and it's like, what is this? This isn't one of the original Targets. Oh no, it's a Pinnacle, or it's a Virgin, or it's a missing episode, or there's so many things out there now, and we've gotten to we started collecting all those too. We've got a huge collection now of Doctor Who stuff. We're doing the magazines. One of the things that Randy's not doing are the comic books. So we already had a couple of those that we didn't even know we had. We picked up with some other comic books at a Comic-Con thing, and found them in a pile of stuff. And so we started doing that, and it has been a bonding thing. It's something that I always enjoyed as a kid, with Doctor Who. And then I was able to, my daughter and my son both started liking Doctor Who. And now we're taking that to the next level. So I think it's pretty cool.
All right, that's great. Chris?
I was always a comic collector. So I would start a series of comics and want to collect them all, the ones before, all the ones after. So this was similar to that. I started getting a few of the novels, and then it's like, oh, okay, I need to get all of them. And back then, it wasn't as easy as now jumping on eBay. It was finding this comic store that had it, this used bookstore that had a pile of them. I remember, like I said, I lived in New York, so I had to drive to Jersey, or had my mom drive me to New Jersey when I called up a place, and they're like, oh, yeah, we have a whole bunch of Target novels in there. Let's go there and see which ones I needed. And then eventually, I wanted to get in the entire series. I wasn't particular on the editions or anything. I was just trying to get one of every story that was published.
Okay. Tony?
Yeah, I don't actually remember a specific point when I thought I need to have all of these, but I do remember that when I got back into Doctor Who in 1999 and discovered eBay, that's when I decided that I really wanted to complete the collection. And that's actually also when I found out that there were foreign language editions of the books. And that's where I really got into some trouble. When we get to that next question. But yeah, it was around that time that I decided that I needed to get all of them. And then Katrina happened, so I lost some of them, but then managed to get them back because my sister ended up having a lot of them that I did not even know about. And it turns out that I still don't have a complete collection. There is one book that I have not been able to get a copy of, probably because I'm just too lazy to.
Which is that?
And that would be Silver Nemesis.
Oh, okay.
I'm not quite sure why, but it's just not been. There it is.
And for the listeners, David just held up a copy of Silver Nemesis. Okay.
Yes, and I think at one point I thought I might like to try to collect the blue spines, and then I realized just what an incredible difficulty that is. So that's the point at which I stopped.
Okay. And Eluides?
I collected quite a bit during the 80s. I was a huge comic book fan, still am. And from that, the same idea, like Chris had stated, trying to get the early stuff as well as the current stuff and going backwards. I did it especially trying to get all those early Doctor stories that did not air, that I learned had been lost and so on. So that was more my reasoning for getting a lot of the Target books. And then, of course, a few, all the Tom Bakers and any other stories that just jumped at me off the screen that I really wanted a novelization of. But to truly get the entire line didn't happen until maybe about 5 years ago, mainly because when I had gone away to college, my mother, in her cleaning sprees one day, had tossed a box that she didn't actually go through. She just goes, "Oh, these are a bunch of old books." And she did know my love of Doctor Who and comic books and all these other things that she would have normally been careful of, but she was just in one of those bad moods of, I'm just cleaning this house, I don't care, and didn't dig into the box to see that underneath some of these other old novels were Doctor Who books. So they ended up going away. About 5 years ago, I still had maybe about 20 or so copies of Target books, but about 5 years ago, I started deciding I really wanted to start replenishing it and just getting one copy of every story. I didn't care which spine it was or anything like that. I just wanted to get all of them. I was just lucky that, like the 5 Doctors, some of them I had taken with me to college. Again, because that was like my first book and that I loved so much that it always stayed with me. So I got lucky holding on to that. And it was eBay. It was eBay that I would go through, and also just friends. Some people that I would talk to that also had them and go, "Oh, you know what? I think I might have an extra copy or two of that one. Let me see." And next thing you know, in the mail, I get a package that shows up from someone in England or someone else here in the States, and there's a Target book for me. So it's been kind of fun, and I finally last year got my final Target book for the actual regular range of things completed.
Okay.
So
well, that's fantastic. Now we'll go across the pond here. Of course, the Target books were published in the UK and a little easier to obtain if you lived in the UK. So let's start with Nigel. When did you start to begin amass a collection?
Well, I suppose it's that question is when do you go from being a reader to being a collector?
Right.
I guess from the minute I realized there were books to be read, I was probably kind of quite invested in it, to be honest. I think what's interesting about those early days is there was, the only way you really got a sense of what else had been published was from that list on the inside of the cover.
Yes.
So, I mean, I know some very clever people wrote to W.H. Allen and Target and got, correspondence through that way. But I think for most of us, the only way to tell what had been published was to see what you were missing from that list. There was nothing until probably Doctor Who magazine, Doctor Who Weekly as it was, started, I think, to give a bit of coverage to the Target books. And then you got a bit of a sense of when things were coming out. And so you went actively looking for things. So maybe around about 79, probably I started being a collector in the true sense. I do remember being very annoyed by the fact that I can't remember what came after Hand of Fear. David probably will know. But for some reason, Hand of Fear proved really difficult to get in the UK. And I've since found out from other people on Facebook and various groups, it wasn't just me. And eventually, none of the big stores seemed to stock it. Eventually found it in a very small newsagents, holidaying with family. And it probably taken me about 6 months to find that particular one. And it's funny, but other people seem to have had exactly that same experience. But yeah, really from the point that I knew they existed, I wanted them, but it wasn't that kind of, I wanted them as a collector to put them away and keep them pristine. I wanted to get my hands on them and, either read them or have them read to me.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. David?
Very similar to Nigel, to be perfectly honest. I think when you're I mean, as I say, I got my first book 1978, so I'd be about 6 or 7. So I don't think you really understand the concept of collecting when you're that age. You just see them and, oh, I want that because I've got another one. And I think, as Nigel says as well, even when I was that age, Doctor Who Weekly was coming out, but you were trying to get an understanding of how big the show was and how long it had been running and how many stories there'd been. Because my mum had said to me, oh yeah, it was on in the 1960s, but you didn't, when you're that age, 1960s just feels like 300 years before. So you didn't really understand it, but I began to get to the point that when I bought books, I didn't like to give them up. And I got that from my mum. She never really gave away books. Once she bought them, she didn't like to throw them away. And so I wanted to just, whenever I saw them, just began collecting more and more. And I collected them right through, like going to college. I've told this story before on the podcast, is on the day that I bought my first apartment, my parents had to go and collect the keys for me because I went to a comic book mart in Glasgow to get my last book. And my father was furious because he couldn't understand why my brain was saying, you've just bought an apartment, wouldn't you be more excited about that? No, I need to go and get the Macra Terra from this guy and at a big exhibition hall in Glasgow.
Well, that means you're a collector, because that's the whole thing. For me, of course, in 1985, I opened up a Doctor Who store in Chicago, which was ridiculous of an idea as it was. I did it, and we were able to get the books wholesale from New York, so it just made sense that when we placed the order, I thought, well, let's pad the order, and we can buy the books from the store at cost. So it was a really great way to amass a bunch of books. But then I started getting interested in early editions, which were unheard of in the United States because they didn't start coming over here until the early 80s. But somebody told me about a guy who had a comic book store in Chicago. His name was Larry Charette, and he had a place called Larry's Comic Book Store in Annex. And if you ever used to get the Overstreet Comic Price Guide, he always had the ad in the front cover of him in a superhero costume because he knew Stan Lee personally, so they drew him in Marvel style. But I also learned later that if you've ever watched The Simpsons and watched Comic Book Guy, he's one of the inspirations for that character. The voice is Harry Shearer's college roommate, but the actual mannerism is Larry Charette from Chicago, because he would stand behind the counter looking all kind of disheveled, and this is not a lending library, you need to buy something or get out, that kind of thing. But I heard he had first edition Target books. He'd keep them behind the counter. He would not show them to you unless you actually bought one. So I had to go in there with money, prepared to buy at least one of them, whichever one he had, and that way he wouldn't yell at me and throw me out of the store. So he would hand them to me. First I had to show him my money, and then he would show me the books, and I bought a copy of The Demons, the original artwork, original cover, and I think it was $25. Which was a lot of money back in 1985. So we had that, and then we started, then my partner and I actually went down to Larry and we cleaned him out of all of his Targets, and because he never went to conventions, so we took those to conventions and had a great time with that. And so with that, if you get the bug to start getting early editions, the next question, of course, is what is the highest price you paid to obtain a Target book? And I'll start in England for this one. So I'll start with David here.
This is a tough one because, unlike an awful lot of the other people on the panel today, I collected an awful lot of mine when they came out. So there wasn't a large amount like that. However, since, thanks COVID, I have been trying to build up some hardback editions that I didn't have. So I think probably the most expensive one would be a copy of, it's here. And for your listeners, it's a hardback copy of The Edge of Destruction. Mm-hmm. And it cost me £75, which would be about $150 maybe?
Yes, that sounds about right. I think I have one up here as well.
So yeah, so that would be the most expensive. But to be perfectly honest, to get the original line, most of mine were reasonable standard price, that you bought, that would be couple, it would be like £2, maybe £3, depending on where you were getting them from.
Okay, Nigel, highest price you ever paid?
Well, like David, I think I've probably got a lot of the original line when they first came out, but I stopped. I'd never collected the blue spines, probably because the point at which they started coming out was the point at which I went to university, so I didn't really have anywhere to put them in storage. Wasn't that impressed by the artwork, first of all, since I've revised that opinion. So I think it was only about 7 or 8 years ago that I decided I would start adding those to the collection. And as someone has previously mentioned, yeah, some of those are quite rare and quite expensive. So probably maybe £25 for a copy of something like the Savages, the Blue Spine edition, something like that, I guess.
Okay. That'd be roughly close to $45, $50 in American.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Okay. All right. And then on our side of the world here, Randy, what's the highest price you ever paid for a Target book?
So I've got probably, it was the later editions of them, the books. I have a couple of hard books as well, but probably no more than $15, $20. But I'll update you when I get the Evil of the Daleks, because I can't see that anywhere on eBay less than like $90 right now.
Yeah. Okay. Yep, that does happen. Okay, Chris, your highest price?
I'm not really sure. I'm a very frugal and patient collector. If I want something, I will wait until it's the right price for me. So it's not anything where I would go and say, okay, I need this one. Price is no object. So most of them I got were probably slightly over cover price. And then since I was collecting since the 80s, I was getting them right off the shelf in Walden Books and Barnes & Noble. So hearing things like the Evil of the Daleks and seeing how much those prices are, mentally it's like, why is it that much? I bought it off the shelf, but then I bought it off the shelf 25 years ago. So yeah, things have definitely have changed. So I think it helped that I got into it early on when nobody was really interested in Doctor Who, and I was able to jump on while the train was still moving.
Okay. Eluides?
Actually, I would say I haven't spent that much on any of them until you, Larry.
Okay.
I think the most I spent was maybe about $15 on a book via eBay until recently, when I had mentioned to you guys how I in the last collector's circle that the one collectibles I would love to get my hands on, just again, it's more of an emotional connection type thing and nostalgia, was I wanted to get the hardcover for Unearthly Child, and of course, because my first book was 5 Doctors, the hardcover of Five Doctors. So Larry goes and shoots me a message going, hey, check out eBay. A couple weeks later, they have a 5 Doctors hardcover. And I was like, oh, okay, let's check this out. I have to get this. Looked, I got lucky, $50. It's not a mint condition, of course, but to me, this is beautiful. So it was definitely worth it to add to my collection. And yeah, that's the most expensive or the most I've ever paid for a book. I've just been lucky with eBay, and again with other collectors, which I know that's something you wanted to talk about a little bit later. So, but that has been, I think, my saving grace financially. Which, by the way, Randy, we'll need to talk. I believe I may have at least a second copy of Evil of the Daleks, because conversing with John Peel quite a lot, I had gotten a couple extra copies at one point through eBay, specifically so I could put one in the mail to him to have signed for me. But just in case it got lost in the mail, I knew I had a backup copy. And I ended up getting quite a few of his Dalek books. So I might be able to help you out with that Evil of the Daleks there, sir.
Sounds good.
Definitely not $90. No,
that's good.
I could never do that to anybody.
Yeah, and and you're welcome. I'm glad I was able to help you find 5 Doctors. That's fantastic.
Oh, absolutely.
Tony, highest price you ever paid?
Well,
and
again,
it might involve the foreign editions, I know.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm going with this, because like David and Nigel, I got most of them at the time they were released, and also from bookstores. So probably the most I ever paid for a single Target book of the original range was for Wheel in Space, and I lucked out there. I got that for $30 on eBay. Because of course that one.
I'm losing your audio a little bit, Tony.
Yeah, sorry. Is
Oh,
this
okay.
any better?
Yep,
okay.
There you go.
Okay. Wheel in Space was $30 because it was so rare and still is apparently, but I lucked out and got that for $30. As far as the foreign language editions go, that's where I've gotten myself in trouble in the past. Because as I've told the story on the podcast before, I paid $700 for the full set of Japanese books.
Okay.
And then promptly had to sell them off again to Arnold T. Bloomberg 2 years later. So, yeah, that was a boondoggle.
Oh boy! Oh boy! Chris,
but I also managed
sorry,
to get.
Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Tony.
No, I'm sorry. I was just saying that I probably paid not quite as much for the French editions and the German editions and the Turkish editions and I'm looking across the room to see what it is, and I can't tell what language that is. I think it's Norwegian. I'm not sure. Dutch. That's it. But
okay.
Apart from that, yeah.
Okay, and we already checked with you, Chris, on this, didn't we?
Yep.
Okay, so we're on to Mr. Lee Thompson here. Highest price you ever paid for a Target book?
I'm going to let Will answer that one.
Okay, Will, go for it.
Yeah. So I found a copy of Silver Nemesis on eBay that I couldn't figure out why it was over $50 until I realized that it was signed by Sylvester McCoy. And he is my second favorite Doctor, and I was like, oh, okay. So I went ahead and bought that, and then realized that there was also another one signed by him that I currently have a bid on, but that's now going to $67. So it could change, but right now it's at $50.
Okay. Well, I know sometimes that the higher the value of something to you might even have a higher value out there. And of course, if you've listened to my podcast in the past, I have a big stance against price gouging, which I know many of my friends agree with. People that are not necessarily Doctor Who fans, they go out and they buy, a bunch of Target books for a few bucks and then put them out on Facebook or whatever for $100 a piece. And we're going, really? It's not going to happen. When I do an outrageous offer at the end of the program, and I do have a Target book that comes up at $346 in ratty condition from a seller. So I'm like, they're not going to sell it. But as for me, since I started doing the podcast, of course, the podcast is its own entity. So the podcast itself has been spending money to acquire things for the show. And technically, while it is a Target book, the most expensive Target book I've had, and probably the most valuable, would be the only hardcover edition of a Target book that was ever produced as a prototype, the Web of Fear. It comes with a magazine. It was supposed to be a Target book collection that I talked with David J. Howe, and he had some insight on it and said that it was, it was in the last episode I did called an item you may not be able to get because I don't know how many of these are out there. In fact, I'm only aware of one other copy that's out there, and that person contacted me after listening to the episode and said he had it on eBay, but he pulled it off of eBay because he wasn't sure exactly how much it was going to go for. But we ended up getting I think this for about $800. Was the cost of this, because there aren't any more. I mean, it's got the Target. I'm just for the listeners, I'm showing the Target logo on this here. It has a reversible jacket. It's very unique, and I thought, wow, we got to have that. That's probably and probably answers the next question to me with the most valuable book to you. It doesn't necessarily have to be the most expensive, but it is one of the most valuable books to me. The other one, I'll start with this one too. The other one, it's not necessarily a Target book, but I'm half Finnish, and this is, I believe, the only Doctor Who book that was done in Finn, the Cave Monsters, and in a hardcover. And I can't even read the price on the back because it's in whatever currency that the Finns used at the time. But it's a beautiful book. It's not a dust jacket. It's printed directly on the cloth. It's just a beautiful copy, and I actually got this from a relative for about $50, so it wasn't too bad. Okay, so the next question, I'll start over in the UK here with David on this one. So what is your most valuable Target book in your collection, or to you?
I think probably to me is my hardback edition of the 10th Planet.
Okay.
Is probably mine. I picked it up. It's an ex-library edition, but it was a very, very good condition one. And I got it for about, I think it was about £2, which now if you look at where it's things like that. But there was just something about it. I think it's probably because it was the first time there was a regeneration and something like that. It just felt really, really, and it just felt, and I think it was the first hardback edition that I bought as well. So that's probably that one.
Okay, Nigel?
Okay, if we ignore the hardbacks because we'd be here all day.
Yes, we could do that.
So basically, if it was kind of like a desert island discs situation where I could save one book from the burning house, it would probably be I have a first edition of Doctor Who and the Daleks, the very first one. And I know there was kind of a sub part of the previous question about what cost you the least. Well, actually, an ex-partner of mine was doing some summer work at the BBC. It would have been the early 90s. And apparently came across this pristine, mint, unread first edition of Doctor Who and the Daleks down the back of a filing cabinet. So I don't know if it's the same filing cabinet where the Ice Warriors video reels were discovered, but basically that was liberated and found its way to me, and I've treasured it ever since, because it is basically it's as good as the day it was printed. So if I had to save one thing, that would be the one.
Okay. Let's go to Chris DeLuca, the most valuable, and you could also throw in the least expensive. I forgot that question too.
I don't know if there's a specific one, but any of those early Tom Baker ones that I started collecting, those probably are the most valuable to me, because I remember grabbing some and bringing them on school trips and reading them. So when I pull them off the shelf, you're just looking at the cover, it's like, I remember sitting in the back of the bus reading that one. As for least expensive, I don't know. I've gotten them in all different places, used bookstores for less than $1, in lots. Sometimes just, I think occasionally we're thrown in with other things I bought.
Oh, sure,
so
yeah.
So
Okay.
there was a lot that I've come across over the years which weren't that expensive.
Okay, Tony, your most valuable book that you have to you, and the least expensive if you want to throw that.
Okay. They happen to be the same one, in fact.
There you go.
Yes, and I think I have told this story at Chicago TARDIS before, but referring to those Japanese editions that I had to get rid of. My friend Jenny Ingersoll, who's been a guest on our podcast a couple of times, visited Japan with her husband a couple years back, and I said, well, if you ever go to a used bookstore, could you look around and see if they have Doctor Who books, and I'll reimburse you, but don't pay more than $50 for any of them. And she came back, and she had a pristine edition of the Japanese version of Doctor Who and the Daleks with the odd TARDIS on the front and anime character Daleks and all that. And I said, well, how much do I owe you for this? And she said, it's a gift. And I said, why? This is ridiculously expensive. And she said, no, it was only 75 cents. And so she gave it to me as a gift.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And I treasure that because I know it's worth more than 75 cents even now, but yes.
Oh, fantastic. Let's see, William Thompson, who's going to take this one?
We're actually going to do our own separate.
Okay, go ahead. Lee, go ahead.
I'm going to go with The Evil of the Daleks. It was just one of those difficult ones for us to find. And we had a great time looking for it and finding it. Like Brandy said, he still hasn't gotten his copy yet. So to me, every time I think about, what we were talking about, this collecting thing, I go back to The Evil of the Daleks. So
okay.
And
William?
the cheapest one obviously was Randy giving us a free one,
the freebie, that counts. And William?
Well, the most valuable to me, we bought this mega lot of really bad books. The pictures were very deceiving, and we're going through it, and we're going, I don't know what we can save out of this. And we got to, I think it was The Monsters of Paladon, and we opened up the cover, and it was signed by Terrence Dicks.
Oh, wow.
And it was like, oh my goodness, what is this? It's like all of these books have been water damaged and have mold on them, and there's the one pristine book in this whole lot, and it was autographed by Terrence Dicks. And I'm like, okay, that's made up for the whole experience. So that was my first autograph book, which kind of gave me the bug now to go, hey, let's see. I've got the original, so now let me get the autographed copy of it. But it's literally the most valuable book because it was the whole experience of, I don't know what to do with these. Here's the diamond in the rough.
Okay. All right. Randy, you have a valuable book in your collection that for you, and then maybe the least expensive?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess this is the reason why I have it is because of that previous slot that Will and Lee talked about, because we went together on that lot, and we're just picking and choosing, and they gave me a autographed copy of the Loch Ness Monster Pinnacle with Terrence Dix in it.
Oh,
so
okay.
that's still one of my favorites. It's in its own little area in the collection. But as far as story wise goes, Doctor Who and the Daleks it floored me because I'd read a few of them, and it's relatively close to the regular storyline, but this is from Ian's perspective, and totally did not expect that. And it's still one of my favorite stories. Edge of Destruction is another one that's really, the story is really good. As far as the cheapest books, gosh, I'd have to go back to Will. I think we probably had some in those big lots that I don't even know if we paid $1 for them. Just because we needed them. We're starting early, so let's find the big lots, and if you don't need them, I need them. So yeah, it was probably maybe $1.
Okay. Eluides?
Well, definitely 5 Doctors, as I've stated, but it's kind of tied with the fact that I have a copy of Mind of Evil that I had gotten in one of those the back of the books that were saying, hey, Lyle Stewart, send us $20 and we will send you this entire big box full of Doctor Who merchandise. And I got a bunch of the hardbacks in there, and I have a pristine copy of Mind of Evil that I never messed with because I already had a paperback version of it. And I got to have that signed just a few years ago by Uncle Terry at Chicago TARDIS. So that definitely, and then tied with that is Dragonfire that I had signed by Sophie, because I got to work as the in-between guy to set her up as a guest at a convention in Indianapolis some years back, and ended up becoming very close friends with her after that, and we constantly talk all the time. So it's kind of neat. So for me, it was like that was the start of the woman I had a crush on is in high school. I'm now good friends with, and her and my wife just love to mess with me on that fact, because when that happened was also our wedding anniversary, and my wife's wedding anniversary gift was to allow me to spend the weekend with Sophie in Indianapolis, showing her around Indianapolis, acting as her assistant at the convention with autographs and everything. And so in a lot of ways that has some special meaning, because my wife just loves to keep teasing. And remember, that was because of me right there. How many women would let you have a friendship with your childhood crush? So
very true.
yeah.
I'll talk to that just a moment, because when I started watching Doctor Who, the first companion I ever saw was Joe Grant, and Katie Manning and I have been friends since 1985. She actually wrote me this morning, hey sweetie, good luck with the podcast this morning. I'm having a good day. I hate this isolation, that kind of thing. So we talk on a regular basis, and whenever she comes to Chicago, we spend a lot of time together. So she's a great lady, and she loves the fans, and Sophie as well. She's at least the folks I've connected with have been great for the fandom. Let's see, Chris, did we get you on this question here?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, I'm just making the rounds. Okay, next, this has also been a point of contention depending on which side of the aisle you are. Do you store or display your target books in story order, or in publication order. And for this particular question, I'm going to start with Tony Whitt because his podcast does them in story order. So
yes, that is our shtick.
Okay.
That is our one claim to fame.
Yes.
And that's indeed the way I display them, and always have, because it doesn't make, to me, and this is probably going to piss somebody off,
That's
it
okay.
doesn't make any sense to do them in publication order, nor in the order of the numbering, because that numbering system makes no damn sense at all.
No. I didn't include numbering because I didn't even recognize it as a system. So it's so crazy.
Because it's not.
Right.
I don't know who came up with that.
I think it was random. Like Abominable Snowmen, number 1. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the way they're displayed in my room as I'm looking across right now. And that's the way I've always displayed them.
Okay. David, how do you display them? Or
they are in story order. I'm looking at them up on the shelf at the moment, and they're all in story order. As you say, Tony, it's completely pointless trying to match them in any other way, in my opinion. There was always a belief that that the number system was some sort of code to for Russian spies or something like that in the 70s and 80s, because it made no sense to anybody else.
The Russians are interfering in our target books. Nigel, how do you keep them?
Story order.
Story order. Another vote for that.
And then within that, so actually where I've got more than one edition, then they're kind of chronological, but story order.
So story order, but in chronological, in
within
edition order
title,
within the story. Okay.
Yeah, it's complicated. It gives you a headache.
No, I kind of get that. Lee, how do you store them?
Remember, we're new to this, so for us, we're going by the although the numbering system doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Right.
We've been going by that just to make sure that we're getting them all. And I'm sure, Will and I have had this conversation, and Randy too. I know later on we're going to do like what you guys are doing, is we're going to put them in story order, which makes more sense. Mm-hmm. But for us, we're just trying to make sure that we get them, and so that's the only way we can do it, by the numbers.
Okay. Chris, how do you keep them?
I keep them in story order too. They're all on my shelf as a backdrop to the action figures, which are getting in story order too.
Fantastic. Eluides.
Story order, absolutely.
Story order. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, William, I assume you're on the same page as Lee here?
That is correct, yeah.
Okay, and Randy, how do you store them?
Yeah, so there seems to be a trend here for the newer people of the group. So we've like Will and Lee, we're trying to keep track of them. We're trying to do them by numeric. There's a Facebook Doctor Who group, which obviously that's how I got onto today's podcast. Mm-hmm. I took a picture of, after like 2 months, I had like 30 books. So I displayed my collection. And wow, the conversations that came, because they were in numerical order. I'm like, okay, well, I guess you could do it alphabetical. You could do it in story, this and all, everything. But like Lee was saying, though, I'm pretty much happy with the collection I've got right now. I don't have the newer ones beyond Paradise of Death. But those, at this point, I'm all about the classics. I'm going to put them back in story order going forward. So
okay,
so you guys haven't convinced me, but I was going to do that. But the question prompted it, so it's like, why don't I just put them back in that now, because I've got the majority of them now. So yeah.
Okay, I'm going to be a lone standalone here. I store them in publication order, and I'll explain why. For one thing, the target books, they start off with the block Doctor Who logo, and so all of those are together, and then they move to the Tom Baker logo, and those stand all together. And some of them have illustrations on the back, and then that stops, and then some of them have an illustration on the front, like the giant robot is Tom Baker sticking out of the logo, and that happens once. And so I don't have a full run. I only have the first 4 years of the show in actual publication order. I do the same for my hardback. So Auton Invasion's all the way on the left, and the other Auton Invasion is somewhere in the middle. So it's that's just a personal preference for me. The majority of people that I've talked to do it in story order. Almost no one does it in numerical order, which is why I didn't even bring it up, because I thought, who came up with this ism? So, it's like there's some that have numbers, and then you have to go backwards because the numbers weren't printed on all of them. Like the early copies that I have of Day of the Daleks don't have the numbers on them. I also wanted to talk about the lowest price I ever paid for a book, and it's not a Target book technically, but when I went into the grocery store, there was a whole stack of these in a pile. This is it says, I don't know if you can see it, but it says free, take one. It's a sample of the Pinnacle edition of Day of the Daleks. It was like half of a chapter on this side, and if you flipped it over, it had the Doomsday Weapon. They were trying to promote these. Now, if I was thinking, I was thinking, well, I better just take two because I don't want to take them all. I would have taken the whole thing if I had known that you can get these on eBay for over $100 now. But these are the two I took from the grocery store, and I thought, wow, I didn't know anything about Pinnacle books. I had just bought the Target book, went to meet my mother back at the grocery store, and they're in the checkout line, all the Pinnacles. And I know that there's like 8 or 9 editions of some of these that came out all the way to 1989. They kept doing that run, and they Americanized it. So so all the words were changed from boot to trunk, or things like they tried to, torch became flashlight, and so they actually rewrote the whole thing. And Day of the Daleks, they corrected Doctor in their edition, which would not have been corrected in the Target edition. So it was a very interesting way to go.
Larry, can
yes.
I just say that the words Pinnacle book and $100 should never go in the same sentence ever?
I agree. However, these free little, I mean, they're real thin. I mean, you can kind of see they're not very, they're like more like a flyer, and they're actually reversed. I have 2 of them, but I have them bagged so you can see both editions. But there aren't very many of those around. I've even looked, and I haven't seen very many for sale. And when I do, they come out a little bit more expensive. But I don't think you should pay anything very high for a Pinnacle book in any shape or condition. I've got all 10, and I've got the 10 that I bought back in the 80s, but that's about it. And they did very well in the United States. They kind of capitalized on the fandom here when the 80s kind of peaked. That was the time everybody, was great to see them. They were in bookstores, they were in grocery checkouts, they were everywhere, but you couldn't get the Target books at most bookshops right away. That came a little bit later on. But yeah, I agree with you on that. Okay, coming up to the next thing here is how do you protect your Target books? Do we bag them? Do we leave them open? What's the consensus here? I'll start with Nigel, because I know I helped him out getting bags.
Yeah, paperbacks. The way I protect them is just try not to drop them on the rare occasions that I handle them, because probably with all the editions I've got something, I guess about 350 odd, so never bothered about bagging those. My hardbacks are bagged using the brands that, yes, Larry has recommended that I've put several people onto, but yeah, so they're in bookcases behind glass doors, and we just try to be very careful on the occasion we sort of like pull one out to read or take a look at.
Okay, David?
Yeah, similar to that. My hardbacks are plastic car, and the bags. I took the idea from you, Larry, when you were on.
Thank you.
But they're also up on shelves, rarely touched, to be perfectly honest, because I've got. It sounds awful, but I've also got them all kind of like on e-readers and stuff like that. So I tend, if I want to read them, I'll use them on that and actually not touch the books. And they're quite far back. I don't have any direct lights on them because I don't want them to be bleached by lighting or anything.
Okay. Chris?
Yeah, unless it's like a really rare one, I don't keep them in any kind of plastic. They're just sitting on the shelf, again, behind a lot of other collectibles, so they're not going to be falling off.
Okay. Tony?
Actually, I'm looking at the bookshelf right now, and I see some of them are in plastic, and I think the only reason they're in plastic bagging is because they came that way from eBay. Otherwise, I don't do anything special to them except only taking them off the shelf when we're doing a podcast on that particular one.
Okay, and just to let everyone know, we are the podcast actually is loaning the Target Book Club podcast 2 copies of the Junior Doctor Who books, which I know were well bagged when you got them.
Yes,
so
they are. They have not been taken out yet because I'm terrified to take them out.
You'll be fine. I trust you. I wouldn't have done it if I didn't trust you. So,
Thank you.
But I know those books are a little bit hard, and I didn't even bring those up. But those books were a little bit more difficult to find in the United States because they were never brought over here for distribution. They were mostly a UK thing, and they only did 2 titles. And they did hardcover and paperback editions of those. I have both, but that's the junior Doctor Who's were scaled down to children 5 to 8, I believe. Okay, Eluides, protection?
Actually, I'm getting ready to order from your touted company for all my paperbacks to start putting in. My hardbacks, I do have basically just in a comic bag with backboard to protect those a little bit more. But because most of my paperbacks I've read enough times that while they wouldn't be considered mint, they are in very good condition because since I was a little kid, most of the time I would barely even open the book to be able to read it. I just had this thing about, I don't know, treasuring the book so much that I wanted to keep them in as mint a condition as possible. But then after a while, like the program guide and the original 5 Doctors, it just got to the point that, yeah, I've read them too many times. I guess you could almost say that they would fall apart, but I don't think you could ever say you've read them too many times.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm planning to do that. And they're on bookshelves out of direct sunlight with Doctor Who figures standing in front of them and everything as well. So.
Okay, and they do make a bag that fits the hardback very well. It's the jumbo paperback bag that has actually got it's SPJ is from Bags Unlimited Incorporated. They actually fit the book not too snug. I know Nigel was really happy to get a hold of those, and David as well. So I mean, I use them for all the hardbacks. And the paperbacks. And of course, I've been working with Bags Unlimited since 1981. They've been around for a long time. Let's see, William Lee, any kind of consensus on protection?
Yeah, we have all of our books in plastic, especially given that we like to be able to see the book. So we have them in not a high traffic area, but close to a high traffic area.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted to kind of cut down on any chance of them being hurt in the future.
Gotcha. Lee, is that your process as well?
Yeah, it is for him too.
Okay.
Literally, our collection is one and the same.
One and the same. Okay, that's great. Randy, any thoughts there?
Well, that's not what Lee says. Well, but anyway, yes, I have mine in plastic as well. But I am if I'm reading them, I'll open it up and I'll be reading this page like this, and then I'll be reading this page like this because I don't want to mess up the book. But yeah, it's just part of the fun with collecting them. I just like to have them in plastic.
Oh, absolutely. And I do keep them all in those plastic bags from Bags Unlimited. They are the paperback sleeves. They're 4 7/8 by 8, 2.5 mil polyethylene with a flap. And I like that too, because I can actually, I'll show the listeners here, I label them and I show exactly what the book is, whether it's autographed, what edition it is. That way I don't have to take it out if I'm looking for a particular copy. This one, of course, has notes the misprint on page 140. My next edition, the 6th edition, says typo corrected, because I checked that. Or I've got a few that are autographed. My Highlanders is autographed by Jerry Davis and Fraser Hines. So I wanted to make sure that was on there as well. So I know, okay, that's the one I want to, because I've got another one that's not autographed. So it's a nice way. If you do want to categorize your library, it's great to put them in plastic. The foreign editions, though, are slightly bigger. I also have a Day of the Daleks from, I believe this is the Turkish edition. Let's see. Yep, Turkish language, 1975, and it's slightly bigger than the Target book. You can kind of see. So the jumbo paperback bags fit those. They weren't all quite the same. That's fantastic. And then finally, if you were to give advice to a brand new collector who's looking to buy Target books, what kind of advice would you give them? And I'll start with Nigel on this one.
I wouldn't know where to start, really. I mean, it's been such a long time since I started collecting. Obviously, that was the days way before eBay. So you've just got so much. I think the issue now is you've got access to loads and loads of information, which is really good in some ways, but also it must be quite terrifying. If you imagine if you had nothing at all in your collection, and basically you went on eBay for the first time and searched for Doctor Who book, God, where would you start? My advice would really be to someone is just enjoy the ride, to be honest. And as you say, I think hearing from the guys, I also would sort of like start with some big lots, and then sort of like you'll just have to kind of refine it as you go along. But yeah, I think definitely there are some good bargains to be had out there if you've got a bit of money to invest in some big lots. But also, I think part of the joy is being able to read them. So I guess that whole drip feed of one after the other, being able to kind of savor the book, read the book, move on to another one, is something that really made a big difference to my childhood. So I would just hope that any future collectors would be able to get the same kind of pleasure out of it, and not feel they just had to kind of amass a collection in one go, because I just don't see the fun in that, really.
Oh, I agree. It takes years to do this, and I started in 1985 collecting and been going ever since. And of course, that's long before eBay. That's long before cell phones and internet. And I'm a teacher. When I explain that to my kids, they look at me like, really? There was such a time.
Yeah.
David, any advice for collectors?
I think similar to Nigel as well, as I think the big thing is, if I was starting out, I'd pick up like a copy of the program guide and start and just get a copy of, just look for an individual copy of each story. Don't try to get, oh, I'd like to have this version of it, I'd like to have that publication. I think you just need to enjoy the experience. And job lots are the way to go for that. You might get a few cruddy copies like William had, but then you find the joy of finding something worthwhile. But I think if you're looking for a specific version of one, you're going to see prices that are going to just scare you to death, and you're not going to want to continue with the experience. Whereas you can probably find cheaper versions of other publications of it out there, and that would be my advice. Try the job lots as well, to just start, buy a bundle of books and start from there.
Okay, Tony?
Well, it comes down to pricing. There's never a book that's ever so worth it that you should beggar yourself, that you should never have to pay something that's going to make you have to go without something else. And luckily the Target books, just the main range, you can usually get those at some reasonable price. And as David said, if you can't find it now at a reasonable price, you will later. It will come up. It's only when you start getting into the special editions and you get into the foreign language editions that you might run into difficulties. And even then, don't overpay. Don't pay $700 for a full set of Japanese editions when you can get one for 75 cents from Japan.
Yes. Chris, your advice?
I agree with what everybody said. Patience is very good. Wait for the right price, wait for the issues. Also, don't be afraid to get some duplicates that you could trade. So if you get a few big lots, go on to the Facebook groups, say, hey, I got these 2 books. Does anybody have anything to trade? So you can use that to offset some of the cost of the big lots that you may wind up buying 3 or 4 of and getting a handful of duplicates.
Okay. Lee, your advice?
Yeah, the biggest thing you got to remember with this collecting, it's supposed to be fun, you know, and for you to go out and buy a book for, $400 or $500, that wouldn't be fun for me. But what I like, what we did was we're doing it as a group, really. I've got my son, I've got Randy, and we've been lucky. We've met a lot of guys like you who really want to promote Doctor Who Target books. And we've got a guy in California that is just amazing that, he's helped us find some books that we were unable to find, and he's not killing us for cost. I mean, he's like, hey, I'm just doing this to help you guys get into Doctor Who more. But just take your time. Look out there. But I really think the best way to get started, though, is to buy a big group of books. There's so many out there that people are trying to get rid of. That's the way to start. You might not get the best, you might get some reader copies and stuff, but at least you'll get an idea of what's out there and start playing that way. That's my advice anyways.
Okay, Eluides?
The chase is what I absolutely love. The chase of trying to find the books. I never really cared about what edition. It was just I wanted one of every story. So I've got a mixture of editions, and that's never been a big thing for me. I think once that has occurred, I've pretty much pulled back and picked something else to focus on. Like I'm trying to collect scripts now. But with that, I might go, well, this version of Genesis of the Daleks I have the Pinnacle. Okay, well, I love that cover from Target. I need to get that now. And then I'll go out and get it. But my priority originally was just I wanted to get one of everything. And then at that point I might. But I know some people they have to have absolutely every edition, every cover version, and they go crazy buying that. And that's just not been the big thing for me. What I'm forgetting exactly what David said, but I was agreeing with what David was saying.
Yes.
With the whole thing. Friends, I've made so many friends through Doctor Who and going through the pages and on Facebook, and like I said, I've never really spent that much on them. A lot of it has been helping each other out. I've made some great friendships that way, and for me, it's just been the joy and love of the series. There's so much vitriol out there of just nastiness, even in fandom, that I cannot stand, that's gotten out there from social media. But there's also so many, you don't always see it, but so many great people out there that you can become friends with. And the Target stuff and anything else with Doctor Who has definitely helped, where I've made connections with people and just helping each other out, getting what one another needs. I mean, I've got friends in the UK getting things for me and vice versa, of things that might be very rare to get their hands on. So I would say those that are into the collecting, besides eBay, get into some of the groups like this podcast alone, and on the page, Doctor Who Collectors Group. That's another one I'm part of. There's the Target groups. And you're going to find a lot of people that they're not out there to gouge anyone. They're just like, you know what, I have extra copies. Like I'm going to tell you right now, Randy, when I disappeared for a moment, yes, I do have it. So I need you to contact me. I'm going, no, whatever you want to pay for it, it's yours. I've already got it earmarked for you. So just find me through Larry on the Facebook page, and you see my name right there. Fully, I'm assuming on Zoom. Get a hold of me, and I'll get your address so I can get that out to you. But I mean, that's just basically it. That's what other people have done for me, and to me, that's just one of the greatest things about the fandom is the positivity when you meet people like that. It's just like, you know what, here, I'll help you out, because that's what people have done for me. So I got to do the same.
Oh, that's truer, wise words. Very well spoken. Thank you. William, your thoughts here? Advice?
Kind of hard not to give any advice no one else has already given. You guys have great advice for everyone. Basically what it boils down to me is just open your mind. Be ready to learn. Be ready to engage with other collectors. Just don't go into it thinking that this is a solo project that you can get done in a couple of weeks. Go into it going, hey, I'm going to take as long as I want. I'm going to learn, because I've learned more about publishing than I ever knew with any of the other things I collect. So it's that experience alone that gives it more value in my eyes. And then, of course, you also have the connections and just the coolness factor for me of being able to go, hey, by the way, do you see my Doctor Who collection? So yeah, but everyone here has amazing suggestions and ideas that every new collector should totally listen to.
Fantastic. And I was just going to go to Randy, but he disappeared from the from the Zoom call. I think it got dropped. We'll bring him back in if he jumps back in. I'll throw in my 2 cents worth too. Is since I've been collecting for 35 years, I just figured out here. And when I started doing this podcast, my goal with this podcast was to educate, illuminate, and point people in the right direction. And I think everybody did a really good job with that. First, I personally want to thank Nigel Adams, because I've purchased Target books from this gentleman, and he was wonderful. The books are in great condition. He's always been great with communication. So thank you, sir, for that.
You're welcome.
And by the way, if you are on the Doctor Who Target Book Facebook page, there are lots of collectors that put up reasonable prices for other editions of Target books. I just saw one up there for reading copies that were a lot. That you could pick and choose, and usually the people are really great about putting in the comments, okay, this one's taken, message me and we'll work this out. And I've never had a bad thing happen through that. In fact, that's how I met Nigel, as a matter of fact. We started that way. And I also recommend too, the Doctor Who Collectors Club on Facebook is a great way to go. If you're not aware of the website Abe's Used Books online, they are a website that collects used bookstores from all over the world. And they have a large selection of Doctor Who Target books, from the really reasonable up to the outrageous. And usually when I get those outrageous offers into my inbox, and this week I called out for Target books, I got a good one. Not quite the $1 million magazine that or it was $1 million new adventure book or something that came out a couple weeks ago, but of course that listing was deleted about a minute after the podcast aired, because I think somebody realized, well, that's not happening. But that's the kind of I kind of agree with everybody's advice. Okay, Randy just came back, I'm going to put him back in here and we'll get to him in just a moment. So I mean, back in the early days, of course, it was going to different comic book stores in the Chicago area. There was Moondogs, there was Larry's, there was the Comic Connection. And of course, when I opened up in '85, we were not a physical store. We had a catalog, and we got lots of orders for Target books to our P.O. box. And we were spending our Saturdays packing and shipping Target books all over the country, because there was not a big, supply of those until a little later. And what I thought was interesting is that after the show was canceled in 1989, you could get Target books at every bookstore that was here, including Walden and other Crocs and Bertanos and other places that opened up in the United States. Randy, welcome back. I wanted to get any advice you had for collectors.
Yeah, with what we've done with Will and Lee, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon.
Yes.
How we got what, 57 years? I mean, classics you got 26, but there's just be patient. There's eBay. You're talking about stores. I don't know if you mentioned Alien Entertainment out in Lombard they've still been a source for me. You have Who NA down near Indianapolis that has some as well, but eBay, and then everybody here just helping everybody out. The Facebook page for the Target books, that's been a huge influence on me too, to get more involved with it. And then the artwork, and then just hearing stories from people talking. Everyone on the other side of the pond, we love hearing the stories. You guys grew up with it more so than we could. I'm jealous. I had to stay up at 11 o'clock at night, probably underneath the bed sheets as well, trying to make sure that I wasn't staying awake, not getting yelled at by mom and dad because you had school tomorrow. But we were limited. If we had the access, I'd probably be a lot more. I'd probably need a TARDIS to keep everything at this point, because I've just been sucking it all in right now.
Well, that's fantastic. And I was going to end my advice with, don't forget to, if you're in anywhere in the world, you can visit Alien Entertainment. They are a sponsor of this segment. And just a quick story, I've told this story many times, but when I opened my shop in 1985, my partner was Gene Smith. And Gene Smith is the president and executive director of Alien Entertainment today. So he definitely stayed in the business a long time. We started together back 35 years ago, and he now does the Chicago TARDIS convention, which I would love to invite everyone to, since it's virtual this year, and anyone could, it's going to be streamed on their website as well as the Facebook page. And with any luck, I will be presenting my annual collecting panel from right here in the Who Room in wonderful Aurora, Illinois. I want to thank all of our distinguished collectors for being here today. Thanks to David Russell, Chris DeLuca, Randy Holndoner, Tony Whitt, Nigel Adams, Eluides Pagan, William Thompson, and Lee Thompson. Thank you for being on the program today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All my travelings throughout the universe, I have battled against evil, against power-mad conspirators. I should have stayed here. The oldest civilization. Decadent, degenerate, and rotten to the core. Power-mad conspirators, Daleks, Sontarans, Cybermen. They're still in the nursery compared to us. 10 million years of absolute power. That's what it takes to be really corrupt.
Take it easy, Doctor, but now it's time for the most outrageous offer. We found a Target book that was for sale on abesbooks.com, or abebooks.com, I should say, and it's a copy of Doctor Who and the Carnival of Monsters from the Doctor Who library. It is a paperback. It says it's in new condition, but it doesn't really give much more information. However, the seller, while only asking $4.95 for shipping, is charging $346.47, which seems a bit high. I believe this book at the very most is around $10 in new condition. So I'm not going to name it, but the seller is from San Diego, California, and has been a seller since 2008. So we've reached out to the seller to find out why such a high price, and as of this taping have not heard back, but we will update you if we do. Again, this has been a most outrageous offer. And that concludes the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast. We want to thank everyone who participated in the Collectors Roundtable, and we look forward to our next episode. Until then, keep collecting.